Hi everyone, it's Carrie, aka NerdyGirlCreates, and welcome back to my channel. Last week we talked about why I felt comic book readers should give manga a chance. And this week I want to talk about why I think DC and Marvel comic book fans should give indie comics a chance. There's been a lot of frustration from DC Marvel readers about some of the stories and the developments of characters, and they've been looking for other outlets. The whole point of my channel was to try to give options. I wanted to talk about manga. I wanted to talk about indie comics. I even talked about in the past some back issues people could check out. But I think today I want to go a little bit more detail on just some of the reasons I think DC and Marvel fans should look at indie comics. And the number one reason I want to start with is creative freedom. Now, when you're dealing with a company like DC or Marvel, it's corporate-owned characters. So whenever a writer's hired, they're hired for the job to write for a character that's already owned and has its own legacy. So a lot of the times the person writing the story doesn't have a lot of input, and there's not a lot of versatility in storytelling, because the job of a corporation, or should be the job of the corporation, is to kind of make sure the legacy of these characters stay intact and that they don't go too far and do too many changes that might upset long-established fans. Of course, if you have been reading DC and Marvel, it seems to be doing that, but not in the right way. Also, creating new characters for DC and Marvel is hard for a writer because a lot of the times they are not going to get compensated for it. So they don't take too many opportunities to try to create original new characters because there's no payoff in it. And I think it's frustrating, and you kind of wish that some of these writers who do come up with new characters, they were, compensated for their ideas. And maybe, if DC and Marvel became more open, these people would be, not just compensated, but more encouraged to try to do new characters. Now, in the indie scene, there's a lot of creative freedom because the writer and artist, they have the freedom to do whatever they want because these are characters they own. They could do whatever kind of story they want. They could do whatever genre they want. They could be, it could be geared to all ages. It could be geared just maybe to an older, more mature audience. They're not shackled by the corporate restrictions. So they can definitely do what they want to do. Now, doing that, there is a lot of chances being taken because, it doesn't guarantee that the story is going to be great or that it's going to sell. But there's still an opportunity to freely express themselves through their own stories and characters. So that is one opportunity that I think is very important to the indie scene. You probably remember back in the 90s, there was a whole bunch of creators, writers, and artists for Marvel that broke away and started other comic book companies such as Image, and one of the biggest success stories out of Image was Spawn. Even to this day, everybody knows Spawn. And that was, creator owned, and he's become such a big character competing with the likes of DC and Marvel. The next reason I want to give is, and I mentioned this briefly just now, but the freedom to write whatever story they want. So if they want to write a very mature theme story, they can. You're not going to get too many of that in Marvel and DC. There was a time when they did have their different imprints where they could do that. But they can go, a writer can go as dark as they want to with their stories. They can also do, like I said, they're not chained to just doing superhero stories. They can do any type of story they want. If they want to do a romance story, if they want to do strictly a sci-fi or a horror, or, maybe just a slice of life, they're able to do that. They're not restricted to what everybody thinks comics is, which is superheroes. They can be they can create variety, and that could appeal to people because, sometimes if you want more audience, you're going to have to appeal to a wider audience with topics and stories that you know they're going to like. They can make the comic as long, the storyline as long or as short as they want to. If they want to have an ongoing series like they have in DC and Marvel, they could do it. If they want to do like a limited series, they can do it. If they just want to do a one-shot, they can do it. Another great thing about indie comics is you have a lot of creators on the scene who will interact with fans. More so than those in DC and Marvel, because once again, they're kind of restricted in how much they can do by the corporation. But you have a lot of, especially crowdfunding creators who are on YouTube, they're on social media, they're listening to input, which is something I think a lot of fans appreciate. Nobody's perfect though. Not everybody's gonna be like with open arms, to say the least. But there is a lot of interaction, and they appreciate their fan base. They offer their fans even perks for those who keep coming back, people who subscribe to their channels, people who sign up for the Patreon accounts, people who are constantly backing. There's some kind of reward back to the fans with indie creators. And that's great, and I like to see that a lot. Sometimes you feel like you're not listened to a lot by the bigger corporations. You kind of feel like your voice is lost in a sea of louder voices that want to make changes to the industry that a lot of fans don't want. And it turns people off, and they just kind of feel like they get ignored or they get called names. So it's nice to have creators who do appreciate when their fans give input, that do like to interact. And you'll find that a lot in the indie scene. Now, the other thing with indies is there is a potential to create new universes. Indie creators could build a world like a DCU or an MCU within the comic book. They can have spin-offs of their series, as long as the original series is successful enough. This, if it's successful enough and built up enough, it could even compete with DC and Marvel. I know that's not an easy task, but they can grow their characters by expanding into other stories with other characters that are connected to the main story. And that is interesting. I mean, you've seen it now with Spawn. Spawn has been building a universe. He's calling it the Spawn universe. Todd McFarlane has Gunslinger Spawn, has King Spawn, has a whole bunch of other Spawns. And it's helped a lot for the image of the main character. And there's also a chance with these universes being expanded upon, depending on the success of the indie comics, that they can go beyond comic books. You can probably get animated series. You could probably get, Kickstarters for animated movies or something. There is opportunity in indie comics, and I think something different definitely would appeal to people who are sick of the same old rotation. And direct competition is like the last thing I want to talk about, because I feel like direct competition is definitely important for indies. If you have the right amount of support, you have the right amount of people backing you, the right amount of money going into it, I think competition is good for DC and Marvel. Because I've said this 100 times, but I kind of feel like DC and Marvel have become very comfortable where they're at. So they're not taking too many chances. They're playing it safe. They're relying too much on the success of their legacy characters, the success of the movies, television shows. They're not really putting much into the comics like they should. And I think if they suddenly had another competitive source, that might drive them to try better. Try to really encourage better storytelling. Yes, it's hard for indie creators to compete with someone as big as DC and Marvel. But again, if enough people support indies, enough people get behind them, enough people, do their best to spread the word, whether it's through social media or YouTube channels or whatever. There's a chance. I mean, nobody saw Image coming when Image happened. Nobody saw the success of Spawn coming when that happened. There's always a possibility. I always feel like people kind of like back away quickly when they hear, oh, you're never going to win against DC or Marvel. I don't think that's true. I think, anybody can do it. I mean, you just need the right support and the right people doing it, and it could happen. Indie comics, it's also very accessible, more so than I think people realize. You can do crowdfunding. Yes, it might be a little bit more money, and it might take a little bit to get the books, but if you're showing the support to like crowdfunding and that person is really invested in making these comic books and putting them out there, the more support, the better it is for the indie creator. They're going to work harder. They're going to definitely put out more product. Best example is Common America. I use this one a lot because I think Iconic Comics has done a great job with promoting Common America, and it's now become internationally successful. It's even expanding into merchandise. There's stuff like statues, and I'm sure there'll be more stuff that'll be announced. There's a webtoon. I would love an animated series of Common America. But there's something that could have the opportunity in the future to maybe directly compete with something like DC or Marvel. I think we shouldn't give up on comics, but I don't think that means we should force ourselves to read things we don't want to read. I think it's time to get outside of the comfort zone, go out there, look at indie comics, look at Boom Studios. They have some great books. There's some stuff there I'm really loving. Image has some great stuff. I have a review coming up on Radiant Black. There is a lot of indie comic companies that you can check out. There's a lot of crowdfunding on both Indiegogo and Kickstarter you can check out. I think it's time to put our money where it's more deserved. And I think, again, if you really want to save Marvel and DC, I think you need to build somebody up to kind of give them the competition that they need to motivate them to do better. And indie comics to me is that place. You also have manga, which I talked about last week. But if you want to stick to more traditional Western comic book storytelling, I think indie comics are the place for you. And you're going to find a whole bunch of famous names in indies. You're going to also find some new faces who are just looking for the opportunity to show their work that are great, but because they don't have that DC Marvel on their portfolio, people don't give them a chance. And I think indie comics is a great alternative to the big two, and I'd like to see more people give it a chance because there are so many great artists in there. There's so many great writers. There are so many different types of stories. There's something for everyone. It is becoming kind of like manga. They're not afraid to expand and do more things than they have in the past. So I would highly suggest checking out indie comics. You're going to have writers who have rights to their characters, who are free to do what they want with their characters. They're going to interact with their fans because they depend on the fans to make their comics successful. And the more interactions, the better product, it's going to grow. So go ahead, do a search on Indiegogo and Kickstarter. Go ahead, look in Boom Studios, Image Comics, Dark Horse. See, there's going to be something that's going to intrigue you. And I think you will be much more satisfied than being frustrated with the current state of your favorite characters back in DC and Marvel. Put your money where it's well deserved. Check out indie comics. Go ahead, comment down below. Tell me if you have been diving into the world of indie comics. Is there any books you suggest I check out? Do you have any other suggestions for Marvel and DC fans? Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.